Well, it's always so hard to fade those songs out. I mean, not only technically, the slider on the iTunes thing is not so great, but because that music is so beautiful. That is the music of Eric Deutsch from our Soul Songs project, actually from our Moon Songs project. Last year we um, worked together, me on the astrology, translating astrology to musical harmony and a set of symbolic scenes. And then Eric takes my limited notes and creates amazing musical grand piano notes on his side. It's a project we call Song of the Soul. And by the way, that's something that we do with natal charts. You can learn about that at geminibrett.com if you'd like. You can actually go to my site too, and listen to the songs we recorded last year, if you would like. So for the moons, I mean, let me just show that to you because I'm trying to remember the particulars. And by the way, how rude. Good morning. Good Mars's Day here, May 30th, 2023. Let me show you and just finish this thought before I get into what I wanted to share here today. So geminibrett.com. At astrology sessions, you can learn about ordering a song of the soul for you, a personal grand piano transmission of your natal moment, or for someone that you love, by the great Eric Deutsch, who's now touring with the Black Crows. Here at Moon Songs is the one, or geminibrett.com/2022 Moon Songs, where you can hear the 13 new moons of 2022 if you'd like. This is actually going to take you to Eric's Bandcamp page, where I highly suggest you have a look around. Eric's solo records are amazing. All right, so this is what I want to tune into today with you a bit. Memorial Day yesterday had me contemplating my grandfather George, who looked something like this. This is the time of my grandfather George Joseph, or who I knew as Bappa, his birth. And I was contemplating Bappa yesterday because it was Memorial Day, right? And thanks to the wonders of the internet, I was able to hear a few things about events that my grandfather was going through as a rather young man at the age of 24, when he hopped on this boat, this USS Philip destroyer, and went off to war. I had a conversation with my dad and with my dad's youngest brother, Charles, yesterday, just asking what they knew about my grandfather's time in the South Pacific on a Navy destroyer. Because of course yesterday was Memorial Day, and there were a couple of stories. He didn't bring too many home with him, and that actually has me wondering how much I'm meant to even investigate or share. Although I will say that I'm very grateful that before my grandfather's death, which was in 2017, I was fully practicing astrology, and I was able to show him that some of the most significant times in his lives were like very significantly indicated astrologically, as anyone who watches my channel, of course, would know to expect, right? But it was fun just to see him like, whoa, what? Like amazed. And I wish I could have shown him then what I know now, because more and more amazing resonances come through. And for me, there's something in this work that helps me kind of know where I'm coming from. It helps me understand a little bit more about my heritage and perhaps even my ancestry, right? So I'm really glad that I was able to talk astrology with my grandfather before he left. I mean, amazingly, my grandfather died very shortly before that so-called Great American Solar Eclipse in August of 2017. And you may remember that was the last total solar eclipse that had I guess, divided the United States in half, or like that moved all the way from the west coast of the continental United States to the east coast since 1917, no, 18, which was the year of my grandfather's birth. I always mix those two up because I have a saxophone that's older than my grandfather. Is 1917. Go con. Anyway, yeah. So my grandfather, very fascinating, was born shortly after a coast-to-coast total solar eclipse here in the United States, and then died shortly before the next one. Right. And at that time, I was just obsessed in my eclipse studies. And we're going to find an eclipse today in this chart, actually this chart that I was showing on the screen, along with the USS Philip here, which is the chart of its first battle. So anyway, yesterday I was on this strange time machine retrograde through some of the like epic battles that my grandfather was involved in. This isn't something I've spent too much time with, you know, and yeah, I don't think he brought too many of these stories home. I mean, who would? He never spoke with me at all about the war. I mean, there were a couple of stories that he told that were more about how when he and a bunch of other Midwesterners got onto this boat to head out to the South Pacific, that they were all so seasick that they couldn't eat a bite until they were on the other side of the Panama Canal. That one I remember. And I also remember that he said that the scariest thing that he ever experienced at sea were 90-foot waves, which is saying something because my grandfather was on a boat that was hit by kamikaze pilots twice. He was actually on a few of these different destroyer class boats. They're a little smaller than I expected looking at some of these images online. And then I was intrigued to find like, you know, how many details you could find. Like I just looked up USS Philip on Wikipedia yesterday morning. He was also on the USS Shaw. And I was trying to see which one of those he would have pushed off on. And it was clearly the Philip, just because I saw when it was laid down, as they say, and then commissioned and all of that, that was very much in the timeline with my grandfather's not only astrology but history, and heading out to the seas. I mean, just imagine what's happened there. And so I've been studying this in my grandfather's chart through the lens of fractal time, and a lot of timing techniques that I didn't know at all. When I was able to share astrology with him when he was alive, and you know, I'm happy that I did. I mean, not only did he respond pretty well to it, and you know, I have to remember that he spent decades and decades and decades with my grandmother, who was really rather psychic. Like my grandmother was an amazing woman, and she actually did some work with the police at one point in time, helping find missing people. Like she had this sight, you know, and I didn't really get to experience that much in my grandmother because when I was quite young, she started going through some pretty significant dementia and brain surgeries and the like. And my grandmother was always amazing, but was not, you know, all there when I got to know her when I was young. And she died when I was pretty young. I think it was kind of like the second close person to me, or second family member that died, you know. Anyway, so as I'm reading about these, like all these battles that my grandfather was in yesterday, and just, you know, trying to contemplate like what that experience would have been like, and I have no idea. I'm quite fortunate to be able to say that. I feel I just have no idea, right? And so I'm trying to look through the lens of the astrology to get some kind of clue, because symbols speak, you know. I think it's one of the great gifts of astrological insight, right? Like we can attempt to know people that we don't know through this wonderful tool. And when we do this kind of work in our ancestor research, it can help us know us too. At least I feel that's the truth, and it was certainly helpful yesterday to retrograde in the time machine and look a bit through my grandfather's life. And I'm, again, amazed that I was able to find so many like details online. I can't say that I believe them all, but a bunch of them totally resonate. Yeah, so I'm reading about like battle after battle after battle, and it's like, wow, my grandfather survived all of these things, and obviously if he hadn't, there would have been no my father, and there would have been no me. I mean, intriguingly, not only did my grandfather have to survive these many battles, but my grandmother's first husband had to not. My grandmother's first husband died in World War II, her brother as well. And of course, if her first husband had died, well, who knows how stars align? Maybe they would have been divorced and she and my grandfather would have come together anyway. Who's to say when it comes to the fates? But anyway, one thing that was happening with me yesterday is I was in this retrograde time machine attempt to stare into someone else's memory lane. Just really kind of counting my blessings, giving gratitude, and straight tripping on the like amount of coincidences necessary. And I don't use that word to mean like trite happenings, right? Like simultaneously happenings of chronos that are necessary for us to come in, right? Like the amount of stars that must align. And one thing I found while I was looking at my grandfather's chart, and I'm really blessed again that so here's the deal. I probably would have not necessarily come out of the astrology closet with him because he was pretty square, at least from my point of view. Except that he was asking me about my business, right? Like, I mean, eventually astrology had come in and I left my like engineering job to pursue my true work. And so he was really interested about that. And, my fear was that his interest was that, hey, you went through college and didn't I give you a little loan to help you finally finish after you dropped out of being a dropout musician? And, he never hit me with any of that. He had just a genuine interest in what I was doing, I think mostly from like a business standpoint. My grandfather was like a businessman, However, what I found out late in his life also was that he had a very different intention for his career. And that's something that I was considering yesterday as I was retrograding in time machine through an attempt to peer into my grandfather's memory lane, and specifically on Memorial Day around his time in the South Pacific. And the only thing I can know about that is looking at some of the battles that these Navy destroyers that he was on went through. There were a couple little stories that were told, but not much. Conversations with my grandfather were very short. But one of those was, hey, what time were you born? It's 11:19 a.m. And he knew. And his mother had told him, and it's something that my grandfather had this amazingly like impeccable memory until the day that he left when he was not a young man. He was always really in shape too. And so one thing I found out pretty late is that he had like an exercise routine that he did in the morning since he was a teenager. And I found out that my grandfather's intent professionally was to teach physical therapy, to be like a PE teacher. And that's what he went to school for. I had no idea. Like, I knew my grandfather as this like businessman, and he never really talked about that. And like, what is that anyway? My grandfather was in like the insurance game, like so many of the men in his generation went off to war and came home. And I mean, I think it was very different for them than it was for those in later times, like, coming back from Vietnam or more recent wars, etc., where they were, I think, very honored and well received in that, And it led for a lot of these cats, into like the business world. And yeah, I mean, I had no idea that that wasn't my grandfather's like original intent. And it actually has me wondering about, did he get to live the life that he wished for? Would he have been happier if, well, I'm sure if he never went to war. I mean, I have to project and assume that memories there you would rather leave at sea, right? And that just wasn't part of the plan. But I also wonder if one of his interests in me kind of leaving my square world job, if you will, in engineering and sales to follow my own dream, right, and do this weird astrology thing. I wonder if he was, I don't know, if envious or proud or whatever the right word would be, because I have a feeling he didn't really get to follow his calling as a result of the way that I guess the fates presented him this other opportunity. I mean, first this like, I don't know, I think for him it was like a necessity to do the right thing and go to war, and then this opportunity when he came back to, fall in love and get married and get a job and be a provider and be a dad and all those things. All right, so yeah, again, I prefer to receive somebody's consent before I speak about them publicly. I have shown my grandfather's chart before in eclipse teachings because of what I had shared earlier, that he was born shortly after a coast-to-coast total solar eclipse and died shortly before the next one came around. Why am I having a hard time with the math? Almost 100 years later. Dang, my grandfather lived until he was 98, almost 99. That's like a good thing to know, right? I'm intrigued by his chart because it reminds me of a chart that I've spent a lot of time with and taught through, because it's one of my favorite career examples, which is the chart of Paul Newman. And why it reminds me of that chart, Paul Newman, who was born in Ohio, Shaker Heights near Cleveland, also was born Capricorn rising. And if you're born that far north of Earth's equator with Capricorn rising, you're almost always going to have a Scorpio midheaven, like this. Now, for Paul Newman's nativity, it's a very different scene. He wasn't born at midday, which is this image, okay? The sun at the MC means halfway in time between sunrise and sunset, right? So 11:19 a.m. on the clock, but this is very much solar noon. Paul Newman, Scorpio midheaven, but he had Mars and Aries. Well, from my grandfather, Mars and Sagittarius, and well out of bounds, a declination of 24.5 degrees south, which is intriguing, and I'll show you why in just a bit. For Paul Newman, it was Mercury and Venus side by side right at his Capricorn ascendant, and the moon's in a different sign and whatnot. But why mention Paul Newman at all? He's been a leading chart that I've both studied and through and taught with vocational techniques. I always love to look for people who have had like more than one well-established careers in looking at vocation, right? Sometimes it's just really clear. Like I love in working with clients, it's like, especially ones who are like just kind of settling into their vocation and how, as I like to say, they will make a loving or looking for what that might be because they're dissatisfied with the work that they do professionally or whatever that looks like. Yes. And so I'll ask, well, what have you done in the past? And it's really interesting to look at all the different things in the chart and how they speak, right? I mean, there's so many different techniques that I use to analyze profession. One of them is the midheaven sign for Paul Newman, Scorpio. But another one is the 10th whole sign for Paul Newman, Libra, right? And that Libra bit with Venus rising, a little bit of what we know about Paul Newman, especially with Venus, who can be the arts, and Mercury conjoined, who can be the voice, oration, right? Aligned at his rising sign. Venus rising often brings beautiful people like Paul Newman, right? Um, and one who is known for his voice and all these, a leading man. You can feel that kind of Capricorn boss essence, if you will, in Paul Newman, but a Scorpio midheaven. And so some of the things that I got to learn about when I was looking at Paul Newman, like what I had known going in was, okay, one of the most famous leading role actors of all time, and like started the first natural food company, right? Newman's Own. And some of the battles he had to fight to make that happen and to stand by what he knew to be right. You can feel that Capricorn rising in a beautiful way. Like, we're amazing to see. I think Paul Newman also has Saturn on high, if I'm not mistaken. Another image of like, the boss. But that Scorpio midheaven, who is said to be represented by Mars, and for Paul Newman, Mars in the sign of Aries, it's like, wait a second, this is like an athlete and a warrior. And indeed, he was like a football player in college. Actually, probably the only reason why he got back to acting, although who knows how the fates would have played if it wasn't this, was that he got in a bar fight with his football team, and he was actually kicked off the team for being one of the instigators. And so he went back to this other thing, looking for a new crew to hang out with at school, which was like, oh, he was like a great child actor. So what does that look like, right? And then Paul Newman. Well, what I also found out, Scorpio midheaven, Mars in Aries, is that Paul Newman was a warrior. He was like my grandfather in the Navy in World War II. Actually wanted to fly, but colorblind, right? Which is intriguing because we know Paul Newman for the color of his eyes. And an intriguing thing about my Bappa, my grandfather George, and Paul Newman is Bappa had these amazing crystal blue eyes like Paul Newman. So it's fun to like see this in their charts. Anyway, later in life, Paul Newman, like that Aries Mars, the traditional dispositor of a Scorpio midheaven, he studied race car driving in preparation for a role in which he was playing a race car driver. And the trainer was like, dude, you're really good at this, like for real. And then he became a race car driver, right? And he won 4 national championships in his 70s. And then he went on to own the team and all these things. The Scorpio midheaven in a Capricorn rising chart, very common in Northern Hemisphere Cap rising nativities, also is in the 11th whole sign. And so one of the things about the 11th of like, well, as the actor casts, right? As a race car driver, the team, you're in it on your own, Mars and Aries, but then like a whole team of cars, right? And he ended up becoming an owner as well. And I don't want to spend so much time on Paul Newman. I only have so much time before I'm going to race in the car and get the kid to school. But yeah, I mean, the other thing about that Scorpio midheaven for Paul Newman is, right, his Newman's Own natural food company ended up, bringing him to creating his own charity, and eventually the Hole in the Wall gang camps, right, which are these amazing camps around the world for kids with terminal illness to come and be kids and have fun. And I like cry every time I think about that. And so let me leave that there. Anyway, so for my grandfather, Scorpio rising, traditionally a sign of Mars. He also, of course, with Capricorn rising, has Libra as the 10th whole sign. And so with Scorpio, my eyes go to, well, where's Mars? Okay. And with Venus, my eyes go to, with Libra, my eyes go to, where's Venus? Hello. And there's a bit of a similar story in there. I mean, he ended up getting into like the insurance wrap, and I really don't know much about it. By the way, Jupiter's playing a significant role in career indications here with the trine to the MC degree, the sun culminating, Mercury in the 10th, depending on how you slice the thing, okay, meaning what house system you use, and I use many. But the Scorpio bit, right, which can be life and death, Cancer, Jupiter, in very near his exalted degree, which is the 15th degree. This is the 16th. There's things about home and family. Like I can see that playing in the insurance game. The sun rising, and he was like a public figure eventually. There's actually a time in his life that I've been studying through the eyes of fractal timing techniques that I'm finding intriguing. Mars out of bounds in the 12th intrigues me too. Okay, so the midheaven in the 11th, and he wanted to be a PE teacher. And so like the 11th would have been these groups of like kids that he's teaching and whatnot. It didn't go that way, right? One of the ways that that played for some time was being on boats like this, right? With a couple hundred other kids, like out at war. Right? So it's Tuesday today, y'all. Let's go there, right? We're talking about Mars. So Mars in my grandfather's nativity, what do I mean when I say he's out of bounds? Well, he has a declination more beyond the tropics. Let me show you this on an astrocartography map. Oh, just put these midheaven lines. So this is where the moment of my grandfather's birth, all of the planets were directly overhead. Like Saturn was here, just south of Hawaii, and in fact let's zoom in, Honolulu. Okay, so why is that a big deal? Well, what got the United States into World War II? And the answer, friends, is the Pearl Harbor attack in December of 1941. Yeah? On that island, right? Oahu. So of course, not every kid who went off to World War II, and especially in the Pacific, like had that, but my grandfather did. So I'm intrigued to see that, especially because Saturn's going to come up in his chart. All right. And I'm realizing that this might be part one of our study because, well, it's not the first time I've been long-winded, is it? This curvy line you see here is actually a circle around the sphere. Okay, and it's the ecliptic plane. It's the path of the sun. So you'll see the sun is right on the ecliptic always. And it's the heart of the zodiac, the tropical zodiac, which derives its name from the Greek tropikos for turnaround. Like here it turns around from the southern extreme, which is the Tropic of Capricorn, and here at the northern extreme, which is the Tropic of Cancer. All right, so the ecliptic, the bounds of the ecliptic are the Tropic of Capricorn, south of Earth's equator, and the Tropic of Cancer, north of Earth's equator. And they have a latitude equivalent to Earth's so-called tilt angle, right? The angle of tilt between our plane of rotation, that's Earth's equator, and our plane of revolution, that's the ecliptic, our orbital path, and therefore from Earth's point of view, the orbital path that the sun takes through our skies. All right, so here's the equator, that's the plane of our rotation, our daily motion, right? And that tilt angle is about 23.5 degrees. So 23.5 degrees south of the equator, we find the southern bounds of the ecliptic, which, by the way, are not always over Brazil here because the Earth is spinning, right, through the zodiac. I feel above the zodiac. But anyway, the time of my grandfather's birth, that's where the Tropic of Capricorn, or 0 degrees tropical Capricorn, was culminating. And Mars is very close in late degrees of Sagittarius. This is where 0 degrees Cancer was culminating. 0 Libra and 0 Aries will be above the equator. Right? Equinox, equator. So if we zoom in here off the coast of Brazil, we are going to find Mars, all right, who is south of the Tropic of Capricorn. And I can see that here, thanks to AstroGold software. When I click on Mars, you see that little information box show up. And you can see declination, 24 south, 3959. So 24 and 2/3 degrees south of Earth's equator. That's this, okay? And that, of course, exceeds 23.5 degrees, or really 23 degrees, 26 and a quarter minutes south of Earth's equator, which are the bounds of the zodiac. Not bounds like Egyptian bounds or Ptolemaic bounds or terms. It's a different thing. These are like the physical north and south bounds, right? So when we say a planet is out of bounds, it is either north of the Tropic of Cancer, overhead in the moment of the chart considered, or south of the Tropic of Capricorn, which is in the case here. Well, you know what's also south of the Tropic of Capricorn? A bunch of these places where my grandfather was in sea battles. Some of them closer to the equator, but you know, his first battle, or what I found online yesterday, was here in the Solomon Islands. Okay, so not south of the Tropic of Capricorn. In fact, I'm not sure if any of his battles were there. Initially, he was off at like the Gilbert and Marshall Islands and Caroline Islands. But what I read about USS Philip yesterday is that the first battle that they were in was on August 15th, 1943. And it was here in the Solomon Islands. Well, notice in the moment of my grandfather's birth, and they're bringing more of these astrocartography lines, Jupiter was at the midheaven there. I'm intrigued by that. I'm also intrigued to see my sister calling me as I speak about our grandfather. The moon was here at the IC. The moon, who's said to be in fall in the sign of Capricorn. And, you know, feeling like family exalted, Cancer Jupiter, who's not just like my platonic family, right? Or nuclear family or blood family. Like this is, in this case, this family of soldiers that he's in. I mean, again, he didn't bring stories home with him, didn't share with me, but I mean, he must have seen so many of his friends die, you know. I think that's less true on the boat than it would be, right, if he was infantry or whatever. Of course, right? It's kind of like the whole boat goes down. But planes did hit his boat a couple times. He had told me that, kamikaze pilots. And so I can imagine that not everybody on the boat survived such an attack as that. Anyway, so feeling that like moon at the IC, Capricorn moon at the IC with Jupiter on high, like had my grandfather in the same moment been born near the Solomon Islands, his chart would have looked more like this. Right, and we get this Libra rising with, Scorpio Venus taking over as the steersman of the ship, Uranus trining the ascendant, like all of these things intrigue me, but I want to get to another space. So transits are one of our great astrological tools, right, of timing techniques, like looking at when a natal chart is activated by planets of the moment now or any other time. Like in this moment in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, where my grandfather was born, Mars is rising. That's intriguing, right? Here's the chart of the moment cast for that place, the Leo Mars on the rise, and I'm talking about war and trying to tune in personally to like the honors of war. So, okay. You know, what else to see there? Well, you know, interestingly, charts do work, even for folks who have left this place for the next one. And so I wouldn't be shocked to see that there's strong astrological happenings like Mercury even transiting the IC, which is the place of the womb and the tomb, as this cat's grandson is sharing about him online. Bappa, it is my hope that you're okay with this. And I did check in yesterday as I was studying and before I sent out an email to my list, speaking a bit about my grandfather's nativity, and it felt cool. And the answer I got was like, hey, dude, so if it's good for your business, all right, right? That's kind of how I knew my grandfather, although I really felt like I'm wondering if he had regrets about not being able to follow his vision of teaching PE in his life, which was originally his plan. But the fates had a different idea for him. Anyway, so there was this time in 1943 where then he's off in war. And let me show you this chart. in August of 1943, which I found out yesterday through some internet research was the date of his very first battle on the USS Phillip. They had, according to Wikipedia, where I was learning some of these things, fired some missiles at some skirmish that they weren't involved in, but this was the first time when they, I guess, quote unquote, saw action and were attacked and had to fend off the, I'll say it, I guess it's Tuesday, so the enemy, right? So what do you see, those of you with astro eyes? Perhaps you saw the buttons I pushed here in Astro Gold software to get to this moment, and I said, full moon, right? So moon is opposite the sun, fully reflecting sunlight back to Earth, or would be if she wasn't so close to this node. Okay, why, what does that do? Well, that means that this is a lunar eclipse. It was a partial lunar eclipse. It was very much visible in the seas of the Solomon Islands, where my grandfather was under attack in this moment. I read on Wikipedia anyway that like the light of the full moon was showing torpedoes that just missed the hole. And so obviously some stories came back from people who were on the boat. Well, that full moon, if it was indeed the moment of the full moon and not the day before or after, it was August 15th recorded, but August 15th happens in the Solomon Islands as far as, Gregorian calendar stuff, the way we do it with time zones these days. It happens before it does in Sault Ste. Marie. I was intrigued to see strong alignments there locally in the Solomon Islands in this moment, like, fun way I can just kind of do that quickly in Astro Gold these days is just grab this thing and relocate the chart to over here, where you see that the sun was about to rise and the moon was about to set. And this was happening at night, so apparently it was happening before the eclipse. However, an eclipse was forming, and we who study eclipses know that eclipses happen for a long time after they happen and for some time before they happen too. This particular eclipse, Aquarius moon reflecting occulted sunlight to earthly view, had Mars just in between the two. Mars is said to be in the sign of his fall in Taurus. My grandfather's fourth house, right? And his new home is this boat that's under attack. But the things that perhaps most jump off the screen in this transit map are the moon is right on his Uranus, right? With the sun during this lunar eclipse on his Saturn. And this opens up the question of orbs. No doubt that Jupiter is close enough to his Neptune to be kind of like opening up like the dream world. And that also, I think, can be the nightmare world, probably, especially when Pluto's on hand, right? Jupiter squaring the Venus. Interestingly, in Sault Ste. Marie, in this moment of the eclipse that happened right around the time of his first battle at sea, and I always start at the birth chart, birthplace, is his Mercury degrees rising. Well, here he is, Mercury in Sagittarius, said to be in exile in that sign, probably feeling very much that as a foreigner in foreign lands, and right, just like hoping he'll survive the night, I'm sure. I have no idea, but I have to imagine the adrenaline surge, which can look like Uranus activations, the shock, right? And also the anticipation, like these guys were out at sea at this point for a couple of months. And, in waters where there were a lot of battles happening, and I'm sure just like looking around, in a sense, like the first battle happening probably in a way eases some of the anticipation. Who am I to say? I have no idea, but I've wondered about it, as you can tell. And I see Saturn trining the Uranus in a wedge with this eclipse, which intrigues me. And the eclipse itself, so Mars is like in the 10th place on the T-square with the eclipse, but Saturn's in actually kind of a release place here in this wedge. And as you can see, the sun is pretty closely aligned to Saturn. Now, some might feel that 5+ degrees is out of order for an eclipse alignment. Like, I don't think so. And I mean, one thing that really intrigued me by that, you can see in my grandfather's nativity, he has that out of bounds Mars and Saturn in a trine themselves. But the thing that really intrigued me is literally the day before I was looking at all of this, I had created this for a class that's coming up, a magical star masterclass that I will be teaching with many guiding star guests. You can learn a bit more about this, by the way, if you go to GeminiBrett.com Lion. Let me get back to that because I want to be here. You know, this eclipsed moon on the Uranus, again, it's just like shadowy feelings around shock and nervousness and, you know, freak accidents, possibility, and all of these things. But that it's also aligned because my grandfather was born with Saturn opposite Uranus to the Saturn. It's like stability, right? Like hold your ground, right? Your boundaries and the like. And I think in Leo, honor, right? What brought these guys to war? Like, why decide to leave this life where you've recently graduated with your PE degree and that was the plan and all these things, right? Because you feel that this is the right thing to do. And that can be Leo, honor, courage. That can be the sun at the midheaven, right? Even in the kind of face of the darkness, right? That kind of Scorpio, Leo, sun culminating. You can feel that though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death vibe. Do you feel me? I want to shine the light, right? And Saturn too at the royal star Regulus. So amazingly yesterday, and I'll share some other examples in time, I'm going through some of the key moments in my grandfather's life. I mean, thinking the birth of his 3 sons. There was a specific date where he was honored on the bicentennial, July 4th, 1976, to be one of many who gave a speech at the North Church where, you know, Paul Revere did his thing back in the day. In fact, I had a lantern, a replica of Paul Revere that my grandfather was given at that time with his speech and other speeches kind of printed out in this folder. I had them all at my place in Seattle for a while. And before my grandfather passed, he asked to have them back, which I was obviously happy to oblige. And then he said that I would get them after he died. I didn't, by the way. I kind of wish I did. I really dug that Paul Revere lantern. And I would love to be able to get through that book and read his speeches. Sadly, I have to say I didn't before when it was in my possession. But who knows where they are now? And I'll just leave that there. Okay. But anyway, I saw Regulus activated again and again. Like, for example, in the transit chart, when my grandfather gave that speech, was honored to do so, Mars was transiting Regulus. I had also seen, I think it was solar arc directed Saturn at his midheaven. I'm going to have to look again. I think that they will come up perhaps as chart examples for a class that I'll be teaching sometime soon in a theater called June 17th is the first of 3 consecutive Saturdays where I will be teaching you, I hope, please join us, how to progress and perfect and direct your chart. By the way, when you hear directions these days, modern astrology hears solar arc directions. Solar arc directions will actually be taught here with profections because they're really a perfection. When I say directing your chart, I'm talking about the old master technique, primary directions. According to Ptolemy's key, 4 minutes of the spinning sky are equivalent to 1 year of life. Why? What? Why in secondary progressions do we relate days and years? I'm really excited to share some of these fractal keys of timing techniques, which can help us understand more about, like wider, greater contexts that these transits, like very like kind of immediate, real time, real life, if you will, can be activating. So that's, I think, as much as I have time to say about that right now. I do just want to say, if you head over to GeminiBrett.com/time, you're going to see something like this. Currently, the early bird price, which is going to live until Saturn meets or receives the moon in the sign of Pisces on June 9th, okay? But let me just show you this page, because one thing I want to share with you is that you're going to get a bonus class, which is Roaring with Regulus. All right, if you just want to come to the Regulus class, I'll show you how to do that. Say it's a $44 value, and that's at least true, because I'm going to have these amazing guests with me, and maybe more. Joji speaking about magical music, art, creativity, and symbols that we've used in the magical traditions for the royal star and Bohemian magical star of Mercury's Regulus, the lion's heart. Kyle Pierce will be bringing some traditional astrology and history our way in regards to working with that star and how it shows up in natal charts. Peter Webb, I'm really excited to bring deep plant wisdom, Regulus associated with mugwort and mastic. Regulus associated with garnet. This is my lion's heart that demanded I get to Regulus next in a series of fixed star workshops that I will be continuously moving through over the course of the next years, really. Alyssa Luna will be speaking about garnet and assisting in ceremony with Urania Universe, who's also, I hope, will pull some cards for us and speak with me about some of the astronomy of Regulus, which, by the way, is actually 4 stars, 2 binary stars. I'm excited to share more about that. And deep gratitude for Dale Barr and Holly Albioni, who have been helping me do some chart research in regards to these Bohemian stars, these magical stars of Mercury. So the Roaring with Regulus class will be on Saturday, June 10th, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific. Of course, recorded if you can't make it live. If you follow this link right here, geminibrett.com/lion, you'll come to Regulus class, and you can donate $23 and you'll just get the Zoom registration link. And again, if you can't make it live, I'll send you the recording on the other side by June 12th. But what I recommend, instead of paying 23, which is my magical number, come over here and pay 88, because then you will get that Roaring with Regulus class along with 3 fractal time classes like progressions, profections, including solar arc directions, which are actually a profection, and primary directions. Showing you these fractal timing techniques. The classes will be on Saturdays. Everything's recorded and conveniently posted on a very easy to access course page. Lifetime recordings for your review. I hope you will join us there. Let me show you in some interesting things. Okay, so secondary progressions, you might know, is we relate the primary, the day, to the secondary, the year. How can we do this? Well, sunrise is like spring and summer is like midday. Hold a second. All right, sorry, duty calls, friends. So in real time, transit time, we have a new moon every 29 and a half days, a full moon every 29 and a half days. Like, intriguingly, when I look at this full moon, I can go back to the new moon that preceded it, which was not an eclipse, but I see it's right on Neptune. And my grandfather's out at sea on a warboat, right? I can see that in his birthplace during that new moon in his 8th sign of death and rebirth. That his ascendant was at the midheaven. Intriguing things. Transits are amazing, but our fractal timing techniques can kind of hold, again, these like longer shapes of time for these moments to work within. So a thing that I was intrigued to see is that for my grandfather, his first progressed new moon, okay, we have new moons every 29 and a half days. We have secondary progressed new moons every 29 and a half years. And for him, the first one was this Sagittarius new moon on October 9th, 1942. Well, let me show you that real quick. And this is not the exact moment, but rather close. It is a Sagittarius new moon very close to the node. Friends, this was a total solar eclipse. So it opened up really a 29.5 year eclipse cycle in fractal time, one of the many images of fractal time from my grandfather. It's in the 11th house of groups, Sagittarius, distant lands. It's in a place, very interestingly, of the 12th whole sign of the Capricorn chart, that's imprisonment and deep fears and all sorts of things. Like, this was all realized, not necessarily here in October 42. I'm not sure when he went off to boot camp and all that. But notice also that at the same time, secondary progressed Mars has just crossed the ascendant. Well, let me go some months before, because remember, the Pearl Harbor attack was December of 1941. Literally, Mars crosses my grandfather's ascendant, secondary progressed Mars crossing my grandfather's ascendant right at this time. Do you feel that like call to go out of bounds into distant lands, in this case, distant seas, and do this thing? So when I look at that transit chart, this eclipse, that's stimulating my grandfather's nativity in such a significant way. Oh my gosh, did I lose that image? It looks like I did, or is it here? No, that's not it. Anyway, learn more at Fractal Timing Techniques, please. I wanted to show that image of the boat in the eclipse chart, but I think you had seen it. There's one more image I've got to share here, and I think I'll get back to this in a part 2, but it's time for me to go and do the thing, which is that there will be a Sagittarius moon event coming soon to a theater called You. That is Saturday's Sagittarius full moon, pretty strongly aligned to royal stars. Yes. And the day before, on Friday, Venus's day, actually for Urania, it will be Venus's hour of Venus's day. She's in Buffalo, New York. It will be 3 p.m. Pacific, but 12 p.m. Pacific here with Regulus rising. We're going to do a free Sagittarius full moon transmission, and I hope you will join us. So 12 p.m. Pacific, Friday, June 2nd. Head online and type geminibrett.com/Urania, and you'll be brought to a Zoom link to register for this free eclipse transmission. I'll also transmit it live here on my YouTube channel, where you can see the recording if you can't make it live. But if you go here, you'll be able to join us on Zoom, where we can connect with you through the chat, and there's a Q&A box and all that. I hope you will. I'm really excited to work with Urania in this context. I love her work. I hope you're familiar with her work, perhaps through the YouTube realms too. If not, please do get acquainted. And if you're not familiar with Urania's amazing astrology, happy to have the opportunity to present that to you here. All right, so in review, geminibrett.com/Urania, geminibrett.com/time, or if you want to only do the magical star work with me and many guests, geminibrett.com/lion. But do time instead, because that will be a